Jasmine Crockett sits in the television studio with the kind of stillness that comes from years of learning when to speak and when to listen. The earpiece rests against her ear like a lifeline to history unfolding in real time. Around her, multiple monitors glow with the sanitized pageantry of the G7 summit world leaders in their carefully coordinated suits. Handshakes that last exactly 3 seconds. Smiles that never quite reach anyone's eyes. The host leans forward with that particular brand of media urgency, the kind that treats every moment like breaking news. Congresswoman Crockett, we're getting reports of some tense exchanges at the summit. Can you give us your immediate reaction to these breaking developments? But Jasmine isn't looking at her interviewer. Her eyes are fixed on monitor 3, where something is happening that the cameras haven't quite captured yet. It's in the space between words. In the way Canada's Prime Minister has positioned himself at the table, in the micro-expression that flickers across faces, when they think no one is paying attention, her pause stretches long enough for the host to shift uncomfortably, long enough for viewers to lean closer to their screens. This isn't the hesitation of someone caught off guard. This is the pause of someone who recognizes a pattern, who has seen this movie before, and knows exactly how it ends. The corner of her mouth moves, not quite a smile, not yet. Actually, she says, her voice carrying the weight of understanding. I think we're about to witness something interesting. Asterisk, the G7 footage rolls with all the polished formality that international diplomacy demands, but beneath the surface, something else entirely is taking place. Trump sits at the head of the table with the casual authority of someone who has never been told no in a way that mattered. His words flow with that particular cadence, conversational on the surface, but carrying undertones that everyone in the room understands perfectly. I think what would be really beneficial, he says, gesturing with the kind of confidence that assumes agreement, is if Canada could reconsider some of these trade positions. Really reconsider them, because we've been very generous, very patient, but there comes a time when patience isn't really the smart play anymore. The language is wrapped in suggestion, dressed up in the diplomatic equivalent of a friendly conversation between neighbors. But every person in that room knows the difference between a request and a demand, between a suggestion and a threat. The words hang in the air like smoke, seemingly harmless until you realize the building is on fire. Jasmine watches as the camera catches Canada's Prime Minister in profile. Most viewers would see nothing, just another politician maintaining composure. But she notices the almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes, the way his fingers stop moving against the table. The micropause before he turns toward Trump with that smile that diplomats perfect over decades. That's interesting, she murmurs. More to herself than to the studio host, the other world leaders shift in their seats with the subtle choreography of people who have found themselves in an uncomfortable family dinner. France's representative studies his notes with sudden intensity. Germany's delegate reaches for water she doesn't need. The United Kingdom's envoy straightens papers that were already straight, but Canada's Prime Minister does something unexpected. Instead of the immediate diplomatic deflection that everyone expects, instead of the careful words that mean nothing while saying everything, he leans back slightly in his chair. The movement is so small it might be accidental, but Jasmine recognizes it immediately. It's the body language of someone who has just made a decision, someone who has been pushed to a line they didn't know they had, and has decided, in that moment, exactly where they stand. The silence stretches for 3 seconds too long, and in those 3 seconds, everything changes. The response, when it comes, arrives with the devastating precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Canada's Prime Minister doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't pound the table or point fingers or engage in any of the theatrical displays that have become the currency of modern politics. Instead, he speaks with the kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly where you stand. We appreciate the perspective, he begins, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone who has given this moment considerable thought. However, our position on these trade matters reflects not just our current interests, but our fundamental commitments to our partners and our principles. We won't be adjusting our stance. The words land with the quiet impact of a door closing. No dramatic pause, no theatrical emphasis. Just a statement of fact, delivered with the kind of finality that leaves no room for negotiation. No space for the usual diplomatic dance of maybe and perhaps and will consider. Trump's expression shifts, almost imperceptibly, the way someone's face changes when they reach for a door handle that isn't there. The assumption of compliance, so embedded in the conversation that it was never even questioned, suddenly reveals itself as exactly the tan assumption. Jasmine's smile begins slowly, starting at the corners of her eyes before it reaches her mouth. It's not the smile of someone enjoying another person's discomfort. It's the smile of recognition, of watching someone execute a move she's seen before, but rarely with such quiet mastery. The other world leaders don't quite know where to look. They've witnessed something that wasn't supposed to happen, according to the usual script. France's representative clears his throat softly. Germany's delegate takes notes that suddenly seem very important. The United Kingdom's envoy studies the table with newfound fascination. But Canada's Prime Minister simply continues, his voice never wavering from that same measured tone. We look forward to continued dialogue on areas where our interests align. The diplomatic equivalent of this conversation is over, delivered with a smile that never reaches the eyes, but somehow manages to say everything that needs to be said. The studio host turns back to Jasmine with the kind of anticipation that comes from sensing a moment about to crystallize into something memorable. Congresswoman, you've been watching this exchange unfold live. What's your take on what we just witnessed? Jasmine removes her earpiece slowly, a gesture that somehow signals a shift from observer to analyst. When she speaks, her voice carries the quiet authority of someone who has spent years studying power dynamics, not from textbooks, but from the inside of rooms where they play out in real time. You know, she begins, settling back in her chair with the ease of someone about to share something she's been thinking about for a long time. What we just saw wasn't really about trade policy or international relations. What we witnessed was the moment when someone who has built their entire approach around the assumption of compliance encounters respectful refusal. She pauses, letting the words settle, her eyes still holding traces of that earlier recognition. There's a particular kind of confusion that happens when you're accustomed to people saying yes, not because they agree with you, but because they feel they have to. When someone says no with complete calm, without anger or drama, it reveals something about all those previous yeses. The host leans forward, sensing depth beneath what could have been simple political commentary. Jasmine continues, her voice gaining the rhythm of someone excavating truth from layers of assumption. See, the expectation wasn't just that Canada would agree. The expectation was that the conversation itself would follow a certain pattern. Pressure applied, resistance offered, negotiation ensued, compromise reached. But what Canada did was step outside that entire framework. They said, essentially, we're not playing this particular game. Her hands move as she speaks, not with the choreographed gestures of political theater, but with the natural emphasis of someone working through an idea in real time. And you could see the moment when that registered. It wasn't anger we saw. Exactly, it was the confusion of someone realizing that their map of how these interactions work might not be as accurate as they thought. She pauses again, and in that pause, viewers can feel something shifting from political analysis to something deeper, more personal. It reminded me of every time I've watched someone mistake silence for agreement, mistake politeness for permission, mistake the absence of confrontation for the presence of consent. The studio feels smaller somehow, more intimate, as if she's speaking directly to everyone who has ever felt the weight of unspoken expectations, everyone who has ever had to choose between keeping peace and keeping dignity. The thing is, Jasmine continues, her voice taking on the weight of someone who has carried these observations for years, this moment isn't happening in isolation. We're watching a shift in how power expects to be received, how it expects to move through the world. She leans forward slightly, her eyes focused on something beyond the studio cameras, beyond the immediate political moment. I've spent my life watching patterns in Congress, in courtrooms, In communities where I grew up, there's always been this assumption that certain voices carry certain weight, that certain demands will be met with certain responses. That's how systems maintain themselves, through the repetition of expected interactions. Her voice carries the particular authority of someone who has studied history, not just from books, but from the inside, who understands that personal experience and political analysis aren't separate things, but different facets of the same truth. But what we're seeing now, in rooms like that G7 summit, in halls of Congress, in spaces where decisions get made, is people saying, actually, no, we're going to respond differently. Not with anger, not with confrontation, but with this quiet certainty that the old rules don't have to be our rules. The studio seems to hold its breath as she continues. My grandmother used to tell me about moments when the world shifted not with earthquakes or explosions, but with someone simply refusing to move when they were expected to step aside. She said you could feel it in the air, the moment when someone realized their power wasn't as automatic as they thought. Jasmine's smile returns, softer now, tinged with something that looks like hope mixed with recognition. That's what we just witnessed. A quiet revolution happening in real time, wrapped in diplomatic language, but unmistakable in its impact. The studio settles into a different kind of quiet now. The kind that follows moments of genuine revelation rather than manufactured drama. Jasmine sits back, her expression thoughtful, processing something that goes beyond the immediate political theater they've all just witnessed. You know what stays with me, she says, her voice softer now, more personal, is that we got to watch it happen. We got to see the exact moment when someone rewrote a script that's been running for decades, maybe centuries. And they did it so quietly, so respectfully, that if you weren't paying attention, you might have missed it entirely. Her eyes hold the weight of someone who understands that small moments can carry enormous significance. That the most profound changes often happen without fanfare or celebration. There are people watching this right now who have been told their whole lives that they have to accept certain things, that they have to accommodate certain expectations. And they just watched someone demonstrate that no can be a complete sentence, delivered with grace and dignity. She pauses, and in that pause, there's space for every viewer who has ever felt powerless, who has ever wondered if things could be different. That's not just politics, that's possibility. That's proof that the scripts we've been handed aren't the only ones we can choose to follow. The silence that follows feels full rather than empty, pregnant with understanding rather than waiting for more words.